Adaptation Plans. My name is Noelia Garcia. I'm the head of sustainability at ISO, and in the name of ISO, I'm glad to introduce you and welcome Mr. Lu Xuzhe, Deputy Director General of the Department of Climate Change of the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China. I wish you a very nice discussion.
开始了是吧？好，那个非常感谢这个塞尔基奥秘书长和诺艾利亚女士，也感谢中国国家标准委和法国、德国标准化机构，能够有幸参加我们今天的编会。需要吗 ？OK， 哎。
Thank you very much for Mrs. Noelia for your introduction, and also my thanks to the National Standards Body of China, Germany, and France, and all the experts on set for your engage of this session on standardization.
也首先呢，我也代表中国代表团，也代表中国生态环境部，对咱们标准化对。应对气候变化工作长期以来的大力支持表示衷心的感谢。
First of all, on behalf of the Chinese delegation as well as the Ministry of Ecology and Environment, I would like to congratulate and I would like to thank you for the standards experts for your support in the long run.
借这机会呢，我把中国关于气候变化我们最近采取的一些政策措施，给大家做一个简要的分享。
Please let me take this chance to introduce you some policy implementations in China regarding climate.
大家知道，应对气候变化是当前人类面临的最突出的环境问题。这个世界各地洪涝灾害、干旱。都对我们的人类的生存发展带来比较大的影响。
Addressing climate change is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing around the globe, like the dry, like the floods, that all affects the human life.
中国呢，大家可能也都知道，国土面积比较大，但是同时呢，中国也是一个容易受气候变化影响比较大的一个国家。
You might have known that China is a large country with this scope, but China is also a country that are easily affected by the extreme weather.
中国连续3年，这个夏季啊持续高温，都那个包括降水啊或者洪涝灾害，也对我们整个的经济社会发展，包括生态环境造成了比较大的影响。
It has been extremely hot temperature during the summer in the past 3 years and have greatly affected our society.
中国政府呢，就是高度重视应对气候变化工作，我们是采取的积极的应对气候变化国家战略。
Chinese government is pay great attention to these issues addressing climate change, so we actively take actions on this issue.
我们提出。要30年前要实现碳的达峰，力争60年前实现碳中和。
We would like to achieve carbon peaking before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060.
对中国而言，这是一个非常大的一个考验和挑战。一方面，中国目前还面临着我们经济发展、改善民生。环境治理、能源安全等一系列的任务，我们现在能源的需求量还在增长。
For China, this is a big challenge because we're still facing the problems of developing. Like we need the energy, we need the people's welfare. We need to take these all into consideration.
另一方面呢，中国从30年前达峰到60年前中和的话，我们只有短短30年的时间。我们知道现在很多发达国家，他们已经提前是吧率先达峰了。他们普遍从达峰到中和的时间都有40到50年的时间，而中国只给留下了30年的时间。
On the other hand, between the carbon peaking and carbon neutrality, we only have 30 years. We know that some of our friends, other countries have already achieved this, but the period from carbon neutrality to the period from carbon peaking to carbon neutrality would be like 50 years, but for us it's only 30 years.
这对中国而言，应对气候变化工作既是机遇也是挑战，对整个中国都要面临广泛而深刻的一个变革。
So this is a challenge for us, but also opportunities for us. It means that all the society, all the relative stakeholders in China, we need to take actions.
中国呢近年来呢，我们采取了一系列的政策措施，然后积极应对气候变化。
So we have some policies implemented to address climate change issue.
有几组数据可以给大家简要分享一下。目前呢，中国这个已经为全球提供了70%的光伏组件和60%的风电装备。
So I have some data to share with you. So far, we have provided more than 70% of the PV equipment, as well as over 60% of the wind power equipment.
2023年新增可再生能源装机对全球贡献超过了50%。
So in the year of 2023, we have contributed more than 50% of the renewable energy equipment and use globally.
新能源汽车的产量，连续9年稳居全球第一。我昨天刚刚得到一个新的数据，中国截止到上周，中国的新能源车的生产量已经突破了1000万辆。
So in the past 9 years, the EV, the electronic vehicles, the production of the EVs, we are the #1 of the world. And I just got this number yesterday that the EV production last year was.
今年。
Sorry, this year the EV production this year is 10 million cars.
这个中国新能源产业代表的先进产能，不仅丰富了全球的供给，同时呢，也为全球应对气候变化和绿色转型做出了巨大的贡献。
So we think the renewable energy industry of China not only provides multiple options for our global friends, but also contributes greatly to addressing climate change around the world.
同时呢，中国积极探索用市场机制、用经济手段来积极应对气候变化。
So we also try some attempts to addressing climate issues by some marketing regulation methods.
中国建成了目前覆盖温室气体排放量最大的碳市场，目前呢覆盖温室气体碳排放量达到了51亿吨。
So we have built a carbon market that covers the carbon emission amount of 5.1 billion ton.
这个与此同时呢，中国积极加强南南合作，支持发展中国家提升他们在应对气候变化的能力。
So we also take actively actions of the South-South cooperation, which is supporting the developing countries.
我们先后与42个发展中国家签订了53个关于气候变化方面的备忘录。
We have signed the memo with more than 42 developing countries, and which covers
42个国家，对，53个 MOU。
So we have signed. Thank you. We have signed over 53 memos with 42 developing countries.
同时呢，我们这几年为120个多个国家上万名的这个应对气候变化的工作人员和专家开展了专项的培训。
So we also conduct trainings for over 120 countries and experts of tens of millions.
来积极开展应对气候变化的这个全球治理，包括推动我们南南的合作。
So, which is to contribute to the global governance of addressing climate issues and the South-South cooperation.
刚才谈到的是中国整个我们在应对气候变化的有关情况。我今天呢很高兴我们参加关于标准化方面的在应对气候变化方面我们做的一些工作。
So the messages I refer to is something about the progress in China, and today I'm so pleased to join this session, which is on standardization.
我了解到标准是资源高效利用，这个能源绿色低碳发展、产业深度调整。生产生活方式绿色变革、经济这个全面转型的重要支撑，应该说对碳达峰、碳中和具有重要的意义。
So I realize that standard is an important support for the efficient use of resources, green and low carbon development of the lifestyle, and the comprehensive green transition of the economic and social development, and there is a great significance for the realization of the climate goals.
我本人就是具体从事中国碳市场建设的管理工作。
So I am looking after the issues in China is the carbon marketing establishment.
在市场建设的过程中，中国有2个市场，一个是碳排放权交易市场，另一个是资源减排交易市场。
So China have 2 markets. One is the carbon emission trading, the ETS, as well as the CCER.
在2个市场建设的过程中，都离不开标准化的大力支撑。
In the process of establishing these 2 kinds of markets, we could not leave standards aside.
我们需要精准的量化每家企业每一个项目它们的减排量。
We should precisely qualify the carbon emission of each enterprise.
使所有的数据都可监测、可报告、可核查，整体满足 M2V 的要求。
To make sure that the data they provided are reliable and retraceable to fit the requirements of MRV. Thank you.
因此呢，这个准确的标准化体系、准确完善的标准化体系是做好整个市场建设的一个基础。
So the standards is the basis, the foundation of the establishment of the markets.
中国政府对标准化，特别是在应对气候变化方面的标准化建设是高度重视的。
So Chinese government pay a great attention to the standards, especially the standards relating to climate change.
我们近期呢会同中国的市场监管总局印发了建立健全碳达峰、碳中和标准计量体系的实施方案。
Recently, we worked together with the state administration for market regulation, issued the implementation plan for establishing and improving a standard management system for carbon.
最近呢，我们又印发了关于产品碳足迹的这种关于产品碳足迹相关标准的一些方案建设方案。
Now, recently, we have also issued some implementation plans for the product carbon footprint.
加快构建这个结构合理、层次分明、适应整个经济社会高质量发展的整个标准体系。
And we will keep refining the standards system for this.
这个标准呢，现在已经成为世界的这个通用语言。这个国际标准是全球治理体系的这个重要技术基础。
International standards has become the common language of the world, and the international standards are an important basis for the development of global governance.
在减缓和适应、应对气候变化、促进可持续发展方面，这个具有特别重要的作用。
It plays a great role in the process of mitigation and adaptation.
我们坚持呢联合国相关会员国进程，在规则标准制定中的主渠道作用，同时加强相关的国际组织合作。
So we will follow the roles of the UN as well as to enhance the cooperation with the international standardizations.
强化国际的衔接协调。
strengthen the international coherence and coordination.
希望通过今天的讨论呢，能够更好凝聚咱们在座各位专家的共识，分享优秀的经验。
I hope through today's session we could reach a consensus of these and share the best practice from each country.
有效发挥国际标准在支持国家适应行动、提升气候变化适应能力方面的支撑和引领作用。
Effectively leverage the leading role of international standards in supporting national adaptation plan and enhancing climate resilience.
最后，期待接下来各位专家的精彩的交流发言，也预祝我们本次的研讨会能够圆满成功。谢谢。
Finally, but not least, looking really forward to your perspective from the experts and the audience. I wish this meeting a great success. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
这是我的张小新，张博士，我是次长。
没给您翻译的特别准确，我有点儿。
Unbelievable.
Good luck.
Can you hear me now? Okay, let's continue. Let's start. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, participants, panelists, and welcome to our panel session, Boosting Climate Resilience Through Standards to Support National Adaptation Plans. My name is Ma Rui. I'm from Department of International Cooperation of State Administration for Market Regulation. And I'm very privileged to co-moderate this session with Lina.
Hello everyone, so welcome to today's roundtable discussion. Thank you for joining us here, but also online. So my name is Lina Ismail. I work at AFNOR, which is the national standardization body from France. And I'm development standardization manager specialized in climate issues. And it's a pleasure to co-moderate this session today with Rui. And I can say that we are delighted also to have such a relevant panel here with us today. And we can't wait to have their point of view expressed.
Thank you, Lina. Before we dive into our discussion, I have a few safety announcements and housekeeping rules. The emergency exit is at the back of the room, and please make sure your mobile phones are muted. And due to our tight schedule, I kindly ask every panelist to limit your speaking to the allotted time.
Okay, so now I think that it's about time to present our panelists. So firstly, I am delighted to present Mrs. Marie-Hélène Schwab, who is Deputy Director of Research at the Commissariat Général of Développement Durable, which is the entity for the French Ministry in charge of ecological transition. Thank you for being here.
Okay, next, let's welcome Mr. Li Pengcheng, convener of TG5 Guide 84 Revision ISO Climate Change Coordination Committee, which is ISO CCCC.
Then we have Mr. Benoît Desfroges, who's chair of the ISO TC 207 SC7, which is the committee at the ISO scale taking care of greenhouse gas and climate change management and related activities in international standardization. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next, welcome Ms. Tafara Smith, Director of Standards Division, Head of Unit Regional and International Trade Branch of Bureau of Standards Jamaica. Welcome. And also we have Professor Dr. Otmar Edenhofer, Director and Chief Economist at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. And Mr. Oscar Garcia, the Director of the Department of Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning of Green Climate Fund.
And also we are honored to welcome Mr. Dr. Jörg Migo, who is project coordinator on climate action at DIN, which is the German Institute for Standardization, and Mrs. Madeleine Dioufsar, who's director of climate change and green finance at the Ministry of Environment and Ecological Transition of Senegal. Thank you for being here. And last but not least, Mr. Lucas Arbeau, senior expert on resilience and climate adaptation at ICLEI Europe. Thank you for being here.
So we have all the panelists and participants. We extend a warm welcome and appreciate your presence. So our session will explore how standards play a crucial role in enhancing climate resilience and national adaptation plans. Our panelists will share their thoughts and experiences on this topic, followed by a Q&A session at the end of the meeting. So let's begin with our first panelist, Mrs. Schroep. Could you please tell us more about your national adaptation plan or strategy in France?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Actually, the efforts to adapt our territory started back in the late 1990s. So we've been putting efforts in trying to adapt our territory for the past 3 decades. So we've been learning on that, and now I think we are quite advanced in our approach. We just published our 3rd National Adaptation Plan that is now submitted for consultation to all the stakeholders in France. And for me, this 3rd National Adaptation Plan has 4 key strengths. The first one is that it is based on a warming trajectory. So basically, we took the IPCC scenarios and we established a warming trajectory. And so the plan sets it as a reference so that the stakeholders can better coordinate their actions. And basically the trajectory is that we anticipate a 4 degrees Celsius increase by the end of the century. The second strength is that it's really a systemic strategy in the sense that it encompasses all sectors of all actors of the society. It aims at protecting the populations, at increasing the resilience of the territory, at improving infrastructures, at improving the resilience of essential services, including schools, including health. And so it's really its aim is really to make adaptation as a natural reflex among the stakeholders rather as something new that they need to think through. The third key strength is that a very operational plan with very concrete actions and designated ministries that are piloting these actions and also relying on indicators to keep track of the progress. And last, but definitely not least, it sets different time horizons, in the sense that we both have actions focusing on the short term, like how to deal with emergencies, because we are all facing emergencies. Climate change is a reality now. And it also sets a longer time horizon in order to anticipate actions that are needed for the long term. For instance, what kind of finance do we need to put on the table to build more resilient infrastructure that will be better fitted for climate change. So that's I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schroep, for your valuable insights and good time control. And next, let's explore with the national standardization body's representatives. Ms. Smith and Mr. DeForges, would you please give us some concrete examples on the positive role of standards in supporting national adaptation plans? For you.
Okay, thank you for that question. Okay, so the Bureau of Standards Jamaica would have engaged with the Ministry of McJC, which is the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, who has responsibility for climate change. And what we have done is to introduce these ISO standards to them, to include ISO standard for adaptation planning and identifying risk and vulnerable areas so that we can plan perfectly how best we can put system in place to mitigate these actions or to overcome or prevent them from happening. Also, we'd have had additional activities that would have done, like we have revised our building codes, which is towards building a more resilient building infrastructure in Jamaica. And what we did is model the ICC codes as well. We look at water management. We would have recently published our standard for water quality, as well as looking at ecotourism, because tourism is an important sector to Jamaica. And so these are some of the standards that we would have look at in terms of adaptation and implementation. And like I said, these standards help with the general way in which we go about, managing the adaptation process.
Thank you, Ms.
I'm good.
The floor is...
Yeah, c'est bon? Vous m'entendez? C'est bien. Merci. Thank you very much. Yes, so I'm Benoit Desforges, chair of SC7 greenhouse gases. So I'm going to put my Canadian hat today, not necessarily my international chair hat. However, adaptation for my group is extremely important. Standardization is important. As we know, climate change is now, and then the adaptation is absolutely necessary, as it is the case as well in Canada. Like a year and a half, we had some major forest fire that was completely something we never saw, and then it was out west in the country, and 3,000 kilometers out east, you could even smell the smoke. So this is something that we need to put in practice. So Canada, in 2021, we released our first ever National Adaptation Plan. It was the work after 2 years of discussion with all the stakeholders, everybody inside the country, government, municipalities, and including standardization bodies such as Standard Council of Canada and others. So we put together the National Adaptation Plan, and because standardization were consulted, it's a big part of that plan. And we are under the I would say, the theme of adaptation. So for the government, it's linked to adaptation because infrastructure. I'm sorry. I'll talk about the infrastructure because infrastructure is key and center for the future. We need to address this. So the goal is by 2030, which is just 6 years in the future, is to have a set of standards and codes to be applied by the different stakeholders. We're looking at different standards, funding national standards as well as local standards, for example, in northern Canada, where it's quite, the impact is bigger on climate change for adaptation. So in the next little while, what we'll continue is collaborate, discuss with all the different stakeholders to put that into practice.
Thank you, Mr. Desforges. And next, let's hear from our key stakeholders, Mr. Edenhofer and Mr. Garcia. Could you please share your insights on the role of standards in building climate resilience? The floor is yours, Mr. Edenhofer.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here. So let me highlight two things or three things. First, when we think about climate policy, we have to take into account fundamentally three pillars. The first pillar is, of course, we want to reduce emissions in order to limit the damages of climate change. And then the second pillar, important pillar, is adaptation, where we adapt to the residual climate change. And then there's a third pillar, which we call carbon dioxide removal technologies, which absorb CO2 from the atmosphere, which is another way to reduce the climate damages. So I'm saying this because climate policy fundamentally wants to limit the climate damages, reduce the climate damages. And the same is true with adaptation. So what is an adaptation measure? An adaptation measure is something where we basically reduce the climate damages, building higher dikes, advocating for more resilient agricultural systems and so on. So then the question is, what kind of metric do we use to come up with a reasonable comparison among the three pillars, which are all investment opportunities, and all investment opportunities have their opportunity costs. So we in economics, we have developed the metrics for this. We call this the social costs of carbon. What does the social cost of carbon measure? The social cost of carbon measures the damages which is caused by an additional ton of CO2 in the atmosphere, and we have numbers for this. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, calculated the social costs of carbon roughly by 2050 between $200 per ton CO2 to $300 per ton CO2. Meanwhile, we know much more about this. In Nature a few weeks ago, my institute published a paper where we come up with much higher numbers for the social costs of carbon in an order of magnitude between $1,000 and $1,500 per ton CO2. So let's assume that we could agree on such a metric, which is not an easy thing. So then we could use these metrics in a kind of an enlightened cost-benefit analysis, where we basically define what kind of adaptation investments are the most beneficial one to reduce the damages for a society. So, and this brings me then to the standardization. So what we desperately need is a way to standardize this metrics of the social costs of carbon, which can then be used in a calculation about comparison the investments in adaptation, in mitigation, and in the CDR. So this is an important task. You might say, okay, why should we do this? And I conclude with that. So let's assume that we would basically, some countries would adapt to a situation of 2 degrees. Other countries would adapt to a situation of 4 degrees. So in that sense, we have a huge risk of maladaptation. Either we do too much adaptation or too little. And of course, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of risk for the countries, but this is something which could be done, reasonably done, by a standardization process, which would allow then stakeholders to improve their investment strategies.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Edenhofer, and the floor is yours, Mr. Garcia. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation to this significant panel at COP29. My name is Oscar Garcia. I come from the Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund was established in COP in Cancun and started operating in 2015, and is now mandated to address both mitigation and adaptation in a 50-50 percentage of our portfolio. So far, we have a portfolio of $15.9 billion supporting financing to developing countries, particularly the ones who have less access to climate finance. We have a particular emphasis on small island development states, least developed countries, and the Africa region. With that, the fund has been working in various areas supporting the National Adaptation Plans of countries. Of the 60 NAPs submitted to UNFCCC, 46 of those NAPs have been supported financially and technically by the Green Climate Fund, making it 76% of the NAPs presented to UNFCCC. Additionally, we count on a readiness program, which is what we call a technical assistance that provides resources for national governments to develop their adaptation plans. We believe that these resources, which average about between $3 and $4 million per country to undertake their adaptation plans, would benefit from a holistic approach that has been highlighted here by many of my co-presenters to transform planning and programming of the urgent adaptation measures that are taking place at a national level, catalyzing innovation, and what is the relationship with the important work that the ISO is doing in terms of standardization. We think that standardization allows us to scale the impact of resources invested in adaptation. This link between standardization and scaling up to us is very important, and we would like to strengthen common approaches that work with a set of indicators that allow us to see how are we responding to the pressing challenges of the hazard imposed by climate change in the short term, the mid-term, and the long term. Of course, we measure greenhouse gas emission reduction as an important measure of many of our activities, but we also consider the social dimension by the number of beneficiaries benefiting from sustainable practices, as well as the health of the planet by the ecosystem and biodiversity recuperation. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. And Mr. Garcia is the last panelist of our first round question. Now, do you have any questions or comments? Okay, Mr. Migo from Dean, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Jörg Mego, and I'm representing Dean, the German Institute for Standardization. And I'd like to give you a quick perspective of what we are doing in Germany in order to support the National Adaptation Plan. Recently, a few weeks ago, the new draft National Adaptation Plan in Germany was published. And for the first time, I believe in the world, this contains measurable adaptation targets for all relevant clusters and respective measures in order to achieve those adaptation targets. And standards are explicitly mentioned for several of the relevant identified clusters. For example, infrastructure, water, businesses, and others. And this is one of the reasons why Dean and two of our partner organizations in Germany, DKE and VDI, have started more than a year ago to develop an action plan with the ultimate goal of supporting our stakeholders in implementing adaptation to climate change, and specifically to support our technical committees in order to include adaptation to climate change in their standardization work. Recently, 2 weeks ago, we have had a workshop at Dean at which we identified pilot projects which we plan to start early next year, which will be the start of implementing our action plan. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mrs. Stu?
Yeah, Mrs. Stu, thank you. I just want also to give the feeling of LDC's countries, as you mentioned, regarding how important might be the standardization approach particularly for the adaptation. I think we might require a lot of tools that allow us really to harmonize the approach. Because we need, if I take the case of Senegal, we are now working on how to help a local district to have a national local adaptation plan. So this means that it will be good to have some standardized a tool to allow to have the same approach, the same methodology used by each district. And this will allow us also to aggregate that and help us in having a planning, a national planning process integrating climate change, particularly for the adaptation. And I think this is really important because, as you say, it brings some coherence. It brings also the opportunity to have MRV on adaptation. You are talking about national communication. This is a kind of MRV for adaptation. What indicator we have to follow? What are the key indicators at the national level? So how, as you say, indicator, if you want to follow it, to report on it, this requires also some resources. So what are the principal indicator, depending on sector, we have to focus on in order really to manage resource and order to ensure that we building the resilience of a country. So these are elements I want to share also regarding the importance of this standardization, in particular for adaptation sector.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it's very interesting because we're talking about National Adaptation Plan, but we need also to talk about the regional inside one country with some specificity of the territories. I would like to propose to Mr. Luluka to give a very short intervention based on maybe what Madeleine said about the need to have the focus on national and the regional adaptation, and then we will move to the other question of the panel.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm coming from a city network, ICLE Europe, and I work specifically at the European level. I think standards have proven to be like a key element of support for adaptation, and specifically also to facilitate this interface between the cities and the businesses. So this is for sure key, and at the same time also they are fostering innovation. I think like at the European level, we are seeing more and more how the research that we are developing could also contribute to standards, and often it doesn't. So I think we need to recognize that in all the programs that, for example, the European Commission has the mission on climate change adaptation, in all these programs that we are activating, where we are putting a lot of money, efforts, etc., how can we make sure that also all the people, all the researchers, and also the practitioners, the local and regional practitioners, can also contribute and write research on standardization. So how can all this research go into standardization? This is, I think, a key point that maybe also could we hear more about also in the panel. But I think like it's key also what was said before about MRV. We always have to think that we are fostering innovation, but we're not talking only about technologies, but also of processes, MRV, taxonomies, etc. So yeah, just this point.
Thank you very much for this insight also, and it's interesting to have a European point of view also about the collaboration between the European Commission and the strategy here, and what can countries at the European scale can put some effort in responding to this strategy. So I have an extra question for all the panelists. It's a good transition that you made, because we will now be more interested in the recommendation that we can have for standard in order to support very precisely the global and the regional climate change actions and initiatives, especially in adaptation to climate change. We just have some insights also which has been shared in the first question, but I would like to hear Mrs. Schwab's perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you. For me, it's really important to connect the work that is done by policymakers and the work that is done to establish standards. For instance, so we have basically about 50 actions in our third National Adaptation Plan, and one of these actions is actually on the integration of climate change adaptation issues into all technical standards. So we did not develop this plan alone in our ivory tower at the Ministry of Ecology. We had working groups, and we had 4 working groups, and one of these 4 working groups was on technical standards. And so we now have one action on that. And this is really important because, so still with this shorter, long-term view, we are working to renew all technical standards so that they will ensure short-term action. For instance, we currently are renovating our buildings, and so we are revising all the technical standards to make sure that the renovation of buildings that we are currently doing actually leads to buildings that are adapted to climate change. And we also are working on long-term standards, for instance, the standards that were mentioned on infrastructure. So yeah, it's really important that this work on the adaptation of standards so that they are fit to climate change issues is conducted, because it really well complements the action of other actors, for instance, the actors, the regional governments, who are also really important in order to design more localized adaptation strategies, but that was mentioned as well.
Thank you very much, and indeed it's, I would say, a strong example of a good collaboration between the government and standardization body in order to enhance the complementarity between regulation and standardization. Thank you very much. Now let's hear Mr. Pan Chengli's perspective. So do you have any recommendation to share about standards supporting global and regional climate change initiatives?
Thank you. I will make it quickly. So I think the first important thing is we should to enhance the information exchange of best practice, not only standard, also how to implement the standard. Today we heard a lot of stories that international standard can support climate action, not only mitigation but also adaptation. But I also heard many voices that we should focus on the implementation of such kind of standard. In fact, today I heard that in France, in Germany, we have different approach to align with the standard with the adaptation action plan. So I think it's very, very interesting. So in the future, I think we should have more such kind of opportunity to share such kind of practice, how to use the standard and how to embed the standard in your national action plan. And the second thing I think very important is to build the capacity, especially for those developing country or vulnerable community, as we discussed today. At many developing countries, they have a very limited capacity to participate in the standard or implement a standard, but we know that there are a big demand from such a country. This morning I heard a very interesting story from our colleagues from Ghana. They hope to develop energy efficiency standard for rice cookers. They look a lot in European standard, in IEC standard. There are no such kind of things, but finally they found that China we have the same the standard for rice cookers, so they use our draft as a very reference document. So such kind of capacity could be built based on the good practice of standard. So I think ISO can do a lot. I understand this time ISO provide the opportunity to provide the in-kind support for some developing national standards body to join such kind of thing session. So I believe they will learn a lot. So in the future, maybe we can continue such kind of things to help their to implement develop their standard to improve their capacity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And indeed, I think that the key word is collaboration and sharing experiences, because each one has a specific approach, but each one can learn from each other also. Benoit, what are your thoughts about that from the Canadian point of view?
Thank you, Elena. Well, what you said just a few minutes ago regarding the flexibility, I think it's extremely important for a standard for a place in Canada. The flexibility of the standards that you put in place is very important, because the country, for us, it's so big that you can have different issues, different impact at different places of the country. So what we looked at, of course, like I was saying at the first part, the standardization is extremely important. Through our national plan, we look at different options, of course, like sustainable cities and communities, such as standards like that. But the key one are the one that we're currently promoting and using through the committee that I chair, which is the adaptation standard under the greenhouse gas and climate change. Those are they're new standards, and they are they're very good to be applied and very flexible in different situations. So those are the 1490 and 91. And if you stick around, we'll have a session after that going in more deeper on this. But to finish, what's very important, though, you can have the best standard in place, but what you need is really raising awareness, the capacity building, the discussion, the collaboration with all the stakeholders, and briefing the policymakers and the people who are making the decision to ensure that they will use it. And same thing with the government, the municipalities. So the goal is to implement that, but you need this collaboration, and I think this word came a few times this afternoon through the different panelists.
Thank you very much, Benoit. Tafara, anything to add?
Yes, sure, thank you. Well, from Jamaica and the Caribbean, one of the things that we think that is absolutely necessary for us in terms of adaptation is, again, getting the word out there. So the Bureau of Standards Jamaica, we engage with the academia the academic community, ministries, departments, agencies, and our consumers, because of course our consumer demand will bring about change in industry. And so we are planning several activities around well, what we call them is public awareness session around the requirements in the standards, as well as to support our government in their whole adoption plan and implementation plan as to, areas of the standard that can help them to, like I said, the risk assessment, the identification of those vulnerable areas, because every weather system that hits Jamaica is devastating, and not just our people, but our agricultural sector. And so we need them to be aware of that standards are there to help them to make the process a little bit more efficient and to harmonize with the rest of the world. As well, of course, standards bring about innovative tools that can be used to achieve our objectives. And so those are some of the things that we are looking into. But then again, we do have a challenge, because developing countries do have challenges with finance and prioritizing, strategies right now, long-term strategies compared to short-term strategies, addressing the current situations, using our resources to address current situation, or using our resources to plan for long-term. And so you do find that we experience that challenge, and so hence we are really trying to work with them to help them to understand that long-term planning and resilience in their activities will definitely reap long-term benefits than just thinking short-term.
Thank you very much. And maybe one short intervention from the Dr. Otmar Endoffer, in order to add something, because Tafara just mentioned the power of academic research also, so it's a great transition to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I would like to highlight two very simple things. The first one is we will always have multiple standards. This does not mean that they are arbitrary, but there are multiple ones. And what I'm saying is, so the example of Jörg Mego is a quite interesting one on the National Adaptation Plan. They have targets for each sector, which is fine, but confronting these targets with the social costs of carbon would allow us over time also to evaluate the appropriateness of our targets. And we need here for that reasonable standards for both. And I think this is something which we should work on this, translating an academic concept in a concept which is then important for institutions like STIN and others who basically develop such kind of standards. This could be done at national, regional and international scale. We don't need necessarily one international standard, but at least all the standards should be transparent.
Thank you very much. Mr. Garcia, anything to add?
Yes, we have identified 4 complementary pathways to strengthen the ability of more effective adaptation plans. The first one is transformational planning and programming. And by that I mean having a systemic view, because we know how on adaptation one sector or one area affects the other, and therefore that systemic view is absolutely critical for that transformational adaptation plans. The second one is catalyzing innovation. There are a variety of innovation in terms of technical standards for infrastructure development that need to be incorporated to address the challenges of climate change. The third one is mobilizing finance at scale and really facilitating the participation of different stakeholders, national and international, to address the financing of our national adaptation plans. And the last one is a coalition of knowledge exchange, which coincides with the points that have been raised, in which I think South-South cooperation plays a very important role.
Yes, thank you very much. And regarding this South cooperation, maybe Mrs. Madeleine from Senegal wanted to add anything about the complementarity between regulation and standardization in adaptation to climate change.
Yes, thank you. Regarding the regulation, yes, I think it's really important to using this standard to help countries at the national level to start having a regulation. By having this, I know for the standard it have to be a tool, so it will be adapt, it will be considered at the national level, but can be used as an instrument for policy. So this is where we're looking at this standardization process, and having such instrument will really help to scale up action. Will really help to harmonize, to be coherent, and also to avoid this maladaptation, because all this coherence will allow really to avoid having this some misplanning. And something is important is how to aggregate, because for us, using this standard will help us to know which are key indicators that we need for each sector, and also allow us to have this aggregation. We in the process talking about global goal on adaptation, so it will allow us to move forward this objective.
Thank you. And yes, sometime we can have some anticipation from the standardization into regulations. Last but not least, I will let Mr. Arbo, to share maybe a European point of view on this recommendation for standard in order to implement well into National Adaptation Plan or at European level also.
Thank you, thanks a lot. And yeah, maybe of the many things that were said, I think like there are key points. You highlighted the word collaboration also, no? That was a bit in many of the presentations. I think working like so closely with cities and regions, we often hear that they lack a space for collaboration and for coordination with other entities, with key stakeholders, etc. I think it's important to highlight that the standards really provide that space, no? Institutionalize that space. So I think it's really key to recognize that this can be done through standards, and I have maybe just a very quick example of work that we have developed also in collaboration with DIN, actually, in a project, in a European project with involving 12 cities throughout Europe that was called ARC, looking specifically at an interface between disaster risk management, heritage management, and climate change adaptation. And we have developed a CWA, a SEN workshop agreement, which is basically a key document in European standardization. And this document is really putting like explicitly those spaces that are needed for collaboration between different stakeholders, but at the same time also providing a established framework for collaboration on this specific topic. So which are the steps that we should take together, who should own responsibility on which sector, etc. So I think like this is a great example of how we could go forward. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. And indeed, as you mentioned it, standardization is the place for any kind of stakeholders, and it's allowing every kind of stakeholders to actually discuss and find a consensus of a very key element and a reference document also. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And I have one thing to tell you that we prepared, SAC, DIN, and UPNOR prepared a gift for all of our panelists and participants. It is a commemorative bookmark, and you can see we have DIN, UPNOR, SAC at the front, and ISO at the center, and it is 29 millimeters in height, to symbolizing COP29. And at the back of this bookmark, we have our theme, our date, our place, and okay, it is produced by Hans Laser Technology, and it is made from industrial waste materials. So you can take one at the back of the room, and thank you very much, and we can take a photo and leave the seat. Thank you. Thank you.